great. God, that's a great song. Oh, my. Hey, happy Mother's Day. You know, it's just for me, a very emotional day. It's a time of honoring a part of everyone that just nurtures you. And I know that I mentioned at the morning service too, I've been in ministry for 30 years. And I have spent time with people in my office that have struggled with the relationship with their mother, that their mother wasn't nurturing and wasn't able to be there for them. And so I know that today sometimes it can be a sad day for many people. And it can be also a hard day for people like myself whose mothers have passed. And so there's all that's mixed into the day. And this morning, Eliza was, it's a 9 o'clock service, we were handing out the flowers and said, and they're all for the mothers, but if any gentleman would like one, you could have one too. And so, heck, I took one. And I was looking at the flower, and I was counting out, there was 6 blossoms on it, and then I automatically went to, we have 6 daughters, and all of them, including who's expecting her first child on my mother's birthday, which would be around September 15th. So even her, at some level, is a mother, because she's carrying child and thinking about all those wonderful children, and they're having children, and just and they're all just going to be, they're great moms, and Kristen's going to be a great mom too. And we had our 12th grandchild born on May 7th at 2:38 in the morning. And this is our 35-year-old, her second daughter, and so we're real excited about that. And she gave birth, a natural childbirth with nothing, just natural childbirth, to a 9-pound, 10-ounce baby. And I said, "Oh my!" And so that happened, and we're excited about that. And she's doing well, and so it's just being a mom and all those things that. And your moms, I've made so many mistakes. How many of you have ever made a mistake in your life in the sense of, I wish I wouldn't have done that? And yet, we know that those that mourn shall be comforted. We know that down the road, that we understand the reasoning behind it, and everything works out and shakes out in God's plan. And for me, I just did such a good job picking a mom. I'd love for you to come by and tell me stories of your mom and the gifts that they brought to you. My mom brought many gifts. She was teased a lot in her life because her maiden name is Land, and my grandpa named her Dixie Lee. So her name was, Dixie Lee Land was my mother's name. She's quite a lady, and she lived to be 80 years old, and so I miss her and I care about her. And so I think the greatest gift for me personally from my mom was the gift of spirituality, because she was a very spiritual-minded person. And she used to read these spiritual books, and she would, remember when you were a kid in school, you had to cover your books we cut brown paper bags out and covered them. You had to. And my mom covered her reading books because people bugged her so much about, what are you reading? She didn't want anybody to know. She was reading very spiritual books, and at that time, as a young person, that was not acceptable. There was a time when all these books were only in New Thought churches, and now they're, Barnes and Noble, get them on the internet, everybody knows, but back in those days, it was a whisper. So she chose just to do her work alone, and when she wanted to astral project and go out into the other dimensions in life, I thought she was like, I love her, but she was kind of weird. And my brothers used to think, God, we love Mom, but God, she's gotten really weird. And I didn't know. And then we had these things from my mother growing up as we became young adults, and Mom always knew the best for us. She wanted the best for us. And at times when I was feeling buried in life, under the soil of life, my mom reminded me at times that I wasn't buried in life. I was a seed planted in God's soil, ready to burst forward. And see the difference between feeling like that you're buried in the soil versus a seed planted in the soil. And if nurtured properly, you will blossom and you will grow. And during that time when she knew I was going to get it but hadn't gotten it, she used to read lots of articles. She cut out articles, and she would place them in places that I would see them. That's the first time I ever heard the Daily Word. It was one of my mom's, what we call them, my mom's droppings. And they were everywhere. She knew at some level, she knew at some level I'd get it. So she just held that high watch. That's what moms do. That's what that nurturing quality in all of us do. We hold a high watch, just waiting for it to happen. So I was picking up flowers, roses for my wife for Mother's Day at the store yesterday, and I picked up an extra bouquet, and I thought, I said, what am I going to do with these? We're going to give them to the person who's been mothering the longest. We're going to give them to the mother with the most kids. We can give them to the first, and so I was going to give them to the mother with the most children this morning, and until in walked this person that reminded me of my mom. Not that she's as old as my mom, but just something about her presence, something about her eyes, something about a stand for spirituality regardless of what's occurring. Taking the church in a sense, and anything that we could be struggling with in life, we're taking it back to the divine idea of it. So practicing spiritual principle, but having it permeate in your being, that you believe it. Not intellectualizing it, but really believe that God is this loving presence and that overcomes all situations in your life. And so I made eye contact with that person, and I said, well, I know who these are going to go to. I'm going to give these to Billy because I think she's that person, not only a chaplain in our church, but for me, she's that person that reminds me of my greatest gift that my mother gave me, which is the truth of who I am. So I'm going to give those to you. Yep. I love you.
Thank you.
How many of you grew up in the 50s, early 60s? Yeah. There's the 10 Commandments of God, and you've seen the movie, right? And it comes down, and, those 10 Commandments. He's kind of upset, starts throwing them around a little bit. But there's these 10 Commandments of God, and then there's these 10 Commandments of what I would call Mother God, the nurturing quality of God, that these commandments that many of us grew up with, and I'd like to share them with you because they're the ones that came to my mind. I came up with 9 on my own last night. One of our congregants threw out the filled in the 10, and so we're going to go to the top 10 of Mother God's commandments to us as we were growing up in those days. Number 10 was, thou shalt not run with that sharp pointed stick, because if you do, it will do what? It'll put out your eye. I said, I won't want to do that again. Thou shalt wait until your father gets home. Remember that? Thou shalt do it because? Oh, yeah, you got it. Do we live in the same house, same town, same people? Number 7, thou shalt not play in your good school clothes. Let me explain that. When we had no money, and at that time my mother was a single mom, and those years we had no money, and so we had, 2 pair of pants if you're lucky, maybe 3 shirts, and what you had to do is when you got home from school, because you couldn't ruin those shorts or those pants or whatever you're wearing, you had to get into those old clothes. And the old clothes, of course, were hand-me-downs, and the play clothes always fit me up here because they had been around for a long, long time, and you couldn't dare risk ruining those new pants. Now, I'd rather be in the play pants, because the new pants, I don't know if you remember this, but the jeans they bought were like so stiff you could hardly walk in them. Do you remember those? They were a dark blue, and they bought them so big. My mom thought I was going to grow to be a giant in a year. And so you cuffed them up, the cuff hit you at the knee, and the waist was so big you had to cinch down on your belt. You know what I'm talking about. And if you bought a new pair of shoes, when you were in those days, when you bought a new pair of shoes, it was so rare to get them. First thing is I couldn't keep my eyes off my new shoes when I walked. So I was always walking into stuff, and they're always so big they're hard to walk in because you trip on them because they're how much can one kid grow in a year? You see, that's kind of how my memory of the school clothes was all about. Number 6, thou shalt put butter on that burn as soon as you can. Butter is the worst thing you can do for a burn. You do what? You put ice on it, but in those days, she wanted you to put butter on it just as soon as you can. Number 5 is, thou shalt clean your plate. There are starving children in China. What the heck? Where's the food, the peas, the broccoli? What are those round things that I hate so much? Brussels sprouts. Gee, God, the Chinese aren't going to want to eat those things. Nobody wants to eat those things. You heard that, right? Yeah. Thou shalt not go swimming after eating before 20 minutes expires. Do you remember that? Sitting at the lake, eating, hour? Mine was 20 minutes. God, your mom was tough. Sitting there, just waiting. Can I go? Not yet, not yet. Watching the clock. I mean, now we know that's ridiculous. Has nothing to